What's up, everybody?
Hey guys, it is Scotch for Dummies.
We're guys in the Scotch journey to help you with your next Scotch purchase. But this time, it's a little different.
It is.
It's different because we got something special spun up for you. We had the pleasure of interviewing Adam and Nora from Lost Lantern. Lost Lantern is an American whiskey independent bottler, and they're really putting some pretty quality stuff out. They got an interesting story, and we had a really good time interviewing them. They're great people, so hope you enjoy it. Check out the video. Let us know in the comments what you think. Cheers.
Cheers.
Adam, Nora, Lost Lantern.
Welcome.
It's pretty cool to have you guys on the show, and very interested to hear all about where Lost Lantern came from and how it started. We'll get into a little bit of your guys' background first, just so that everybody watching knows who you are and how you got into this. And
thank you for having us on. This is super fun. We've watched a number of videos and also had a lot of fun watching your reaction to our Mega Mesquite whiskey late last year. So thanks for having us. So I guess my background first, and then you can do your background, and then we can talk a little bit about the origin story of Lost Lantern. So I have a very varied background. My spirits industry experience comes from being sales manager at Astor Wines and Spirits in New York, one of the best whiskey collections in the country, a great place to develop my palate. It's also where we fell in love with Scotch independent bottlers. So we're married, so a lot of what we did was together when it came to developing palates, but I spent a lot of time drinking American craft as much as it was available at the time. This is a while back now. And then also Scotch IBs there. I also am the business side of the business. I have a background in finance and operations. And so I run the business on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And my background was primarily in the whiskey industry, but coming in as a journalist, which I think is an interesting different side of the industry. So I was originally a spirits business reporter for a industry trade magazine called Market Watch, and then fell deeply in love with whiskey and learned a ton about it, and switched over to being a senior whiskey specialist and whiskey reviewer for Whiskey Advocate magazine. So I was reviewing primarily American whiskeys, but writing about whiskey from all around the world. And that was actually where the idea for Lost Lantern first came from. Is I was writing a story with a coworker about Scotch independent bottlers and this rich tradition that's been around for 200 years of companies like Gordon and MacPhail that were buying barrels from all around Scotland and putting it out with full transparency where it came from. And I was writing a different story about American whiskey and the rise of new distilleries all around the U.S. And Nora and I were talking about it, and we realized that like this model that's always been around in Scotland now makes sense for the United States because there's so many distilleries all over the country now.
I was going to make that point. You know, if you're a Scotch enthusiast like we are, you know what an IB is. You know what an independent bottler is. I mean, there's a ton of them over there. There's probably way more than I could name. And then you can touch on the big ones, like you said, Gordon and MacPhail. I mean, 200 years. So you don't see that over here, but now we do, right? Welcome,
Yeah,
Lost
so you
Lantern.
do.
Well, so yeah, what is the market for American independent bottlers? You kind of the first. What's the competitive space there?
So there are at least, well, Single-Cask Nation, it was the first American independent bottler, but they were focused primarily on Scotch. They're still focused primarily on Scotch, but they do some American whiskey as well. To the best of our knowledge, we're the first American independent bottler that is 100% focused on American whiskey. What we can add is that curation of the American whiskey landscape. There are 2,600 distilleries across the United States right now, which is just nonsense. It's crazy. And they're all regionally focused. So we a couple of years talking before we decided to do this, talking about how much we really wanted someone to kick the tires, sift through all those distilleries and tell us what whiskey to be drinking. And that independent bottler model, the independent bottler model is the perfect one to do that kind of thing. And eventually we looked at each other and said, hey, maybe we should do it. We should bring it over here and focus on American whiskey.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we were going through some of these bottles and some other American single malts, you can almost pick out regional variances like you have in Scotland. You know, you've got the Texas, you've got the Kentucky, you've got the Northwest. You know, you're starting to develop that kind of
Well, at least we hope that,
Yeah,
right?
well,
That was kind of our passion
picking
for it.
up a regional flavor. Now, yes, they can buy barrels and they can store elsewhere and all that kind of stuff. But you can kind of figure out
You can.
each region is starting to create their own style. Really kind of neat.
Are you guys saying the same thing? Are you guys kind of agreeing on that? Okay.
It's in its early stages and it's going to take many years to fully develop. But if you just think
Yes.
about the variety of climates in the United States, goes without saying it's such a bigger country than Scotland is. Like Texas
yeah.
alone is 9 times bigger than Scotland.
Right.
There's so much room for regional whiskey variation
Yeah.
in the US.
It
Yeah.
sounds overwhelming though. When you say 2,600 distilleries, is that what you said? I mean,
Yep.
that's a lot. And I already start having anxiety of how many, I dare say, bad whiskeys do you have to taste before? I mean, that 2,600, there's going to be some bad ones in there, right?
Yes.
But obviously there's some really good ones
Okay.
too. So you guys definitely put your homework in. We read your story about, you know, the trip, the journey, right?
The journey.
It was 8 months or something like that across country. And it's like,
Well, hold on a second. I want to hear
like
about this,
that.
but before we hear about this, we've got some bottles we've got to get through.
Oh, okay.
So why don't you quickly go through all the 4 bottles real quick, and then I think we're going to pour the first one.
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, today we're tasting 4 different whiskeys that we released. And I should say we don't only do single malt and blends of single malt. We also do bourbon and rye, but obviously for today we're talking about single malt. The first one is our American Vatted Malt, which is our original flagship. That's a blend of American single malts from all around the country. We'll talk a little bit more about what went into that shortly. Second is Gentle Giant, which is a Texas single malt from Balcones Distilling, one of the great American single malt distilleries. And then we have 2 more blended malts at the end, Flame and Shadow, which are both smoked malts. One of them mesquite smoked, one of them peated. So a new type of smoking tradition versus a very traditional one.
Yeah, I'm super excited for these because we did, as you could tell, we did peek a little bit behind the curtains on some of these and have an idea.
Fine.
So I'm excited
Just
to
a
talk to
little.
you guys about this, just a little bit, but there's 4 of us to be fair. So, but I'm going to pour this. You guys might have one poured yet, and let's talk through this. And maybe you can talk about that journey. You're
yeah,
asking.
as we talk through this particular one. So, but let's talk about this specific bottle before we get into that journey, because reading the sheet that you guys gave to us, there is, and I'm excited to use this word, a plethora of distilleries in this bottle, right? I mean, I'm like,
word.
wow, there's a long list here. How do you do that?
Why'd you pick so many? I mean, like, what was the motivation?
So it's actually it's perfect timing to talk about this with our road trip. So this came together while we were
Okay.
on the road driving around the
Okay.
country. And when we would visit single malt distilleries, a number of them would say, "Oh, I really wish that I could blend with other people's whiskey. How cool is it what you guys are doing? This is going to be something so fun for you. I wish I could do that." And so we started to come up with the idea of giving them that opportunity to do exactly that.
It sounds like it's as hard as putting a white jigsaw puzzle together, right? With no picture on it. I mean, you've got how many distilleries to choose from, and now you're going to go and pick, 8 of them or something like that? And then how do you know how to put I'm just baffled by that process.
Yeah, it is. It can definitely be one of the most the challenging aspects of putting a whiskey together, and which is kind of why we sort of cheated for this first one, in that we decided to invite 6 of our favorite American single malt distillers and blenders to join us, and we actually all got together at one of the whiskey conferences in Colorado, and everyone brought some of their some barrels that they were really excited to explore blending with their peers, and we all, over the course of a very long day, everyone created their own blends and exchanged ideas. And the only rule was every blend had to incorporate at least 1 barrel from each of the distilleries that were there. And it was a perfect way to get people to explore blending flavors that they had never had a chance to before.
And very early on in our trajectory, a great way to get buy-in from some of the great
Yeah.
American single malt
Great
producers.
business idea. Yep.
Yeah,
Smart.
on that.
So this is that
yeah.
story. This is the winner of that. Okay.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Let's get the details
So
on it.
Yeah.
What's
and,
the ABV on this guy?
So this is
105
Yeah. So
proof.
52.5% ABV. So it's a blend of whiskey from 6 different American single malt distilleries, and I'm going to go through them all.
Okay.
It's Copperworks in Washington, Westward in Oregon, Santa Fe Spirits in New Mexico, Balcones in Texas, Virginia Distillery Company in Virginia, and 888 on the island of Nantucket in Massachusetts.
Wow.
So
And
Coast to coast.
the intention of this is to highlight the landscape of American whiskey. So if you look at the barrel details, which are available on our website, and I know we sent you a bunch of information, there is
Yes.
such a range of whiskey in
right.
this.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely appealing to me as we smell it as right now. I mean, it's just
Yeah,
lovely bouquet.
so a lot of people are single malt snobs, and I will say a blended whiskey has some great potential because you can add more flavor components than you can from a single like a single malt. That you can add those layers that you don't get from one distillery. You can add them together, and you create in my view, a lot of blended whiskeys have a much broader profile than a single malt.
And
So,
for
do you
clarity,
guys-
it's a blend of only single malt. So,
Right.
since there's no real American equivalent of Scottish grain whiskey, at least not commonly, so it really brings together flavors of whiskey that are very, very different, from like the beer-driven single malt to the Pacific Northwest to the hotter climate of New Mexico and Texas, and then the East Coast distilleries, which are a little more traditional in their style. So quite a big array of flavors coming together.
Yeah, it's full. Like you get from the very beginning to the very end, the finish, it's well rounded and full. Lots
Yeah.
of flavor going on.
You got a great balance of oak in there, or of the wood in there.
Yep.
I think the mouthfeel is really great. I love it's somewhat chewy. It's a heavy kind of, when I think of like a classic Scotch, this hits that profile
Yeah.
with all those kind of components in it.
So
But it's American malt, yeah.
vatted, did you guys water this down to 52.5?
Yeah,
And how big was
Yeah.
the vat? How many bottles did it produce?
This produced about 3,000 bottles, which is our
Okay.
biggest release so far, because to get everyone in, it ended up being 2 barrels from each distillery, which was not the intention. We never in a million years thought it would be that clean, but that's what it ended up being. And we did actually bring it down. We very, very rarely add water to our whiskey. But we do when we need it to integrate the underlying components. So we found that at cask strength, it was quite spiky and things didn't necessarily play well. And when we brought that down a little bit, they came together and are much better friends now that there's a little water in the mix.
Yeah,
Your
we
whiskey
smoked it
nerdiness
over
is
4
coming
months.
out, and I'm loving it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because how old are these whiskeys? Is it non-age? I don't remember the
Yeah, it is
age on
non-age.
there. Okay.
So it ranges from 2 to 7. Yeah.
2 to 7?
2
so
to 7, okay.
Yeah. So it's nothing in American single malt really gets as old as even standard releases in Scotland, where both partly because of the climate, partly because of when American single malt got started.
Yeah.
But we wanted to create a whiskey that really, like Nora said, showcased where American single malt is at this particular point in time. And for that reason, we actually had 2 finalists for this whiskey that were quite different from each other. One of them was from barrels that were almost all in used oak, and it really tasted a lot like a Scotch. And then there was this one, which has some similarities to that, but also has a little more new oak influence, a little more of that beery influence from Westward and Copperworks in the Pacific Northwest, and really showed how American single malt is its own thing. It's not just like here's us imitating Scotch. It's new ideas on a very old tradition. that we
So
all-
describe the beery influence that you say, because that's not something I'm used to hearing.
So- For distilleries in the Pacific Northwest that come from a brewing tradition, places like Westland, Westward, Copperworks, where they're often started by brewers, we find that they spend a lot of time with the fermentation part of the process, and they make a wash that actually tastes good, and the wort definitely tastes good. Before they distill, instead of distilleries that are often very focused on the distillation process and they ferment, but it's less about the art of the fermentation. We find it brings out more of a floral orchard fruit note than we get from other places that are not necessarily coming from that tradition.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was watching an interview with somebody that mentioned that brewing for beer is a much more difficult profession than brewing for whiskey, because you drink that pure fermentation material in a beer, whereas whiskey, you distill out most of it. And so you just kind of make it for the high yield and you then work through that. So that's really interesting to see that. I can see getting more esters and some of those fruits in there. Yeah. Neat.
The nice thing about this too is, I mean, it's up there as far as ABV, but it's very approachable. Right out, you don't need to do anything to it.
Right. Well, you said you guys rarely add whiskey to, water to your whiskey when you're bottling. Do you add water to your?
I don't.
I
He
usually do.
does.
I often add a rock, or I didn't used to, but it's like this last year I've been enjoying things on a big cube a lot more.
Yeah. I think our palates are so inoculated to high proof because we're tasting things like for selection at 140 proof, 135 proof regularly. So for us, sometimes even 100 proof things can taste slightly watered down because our palates are so primed for
Sure.
high proof things.
That's incredible. I can tell you, we've done a few like
69%ers.
Oh yeah, we've done a few where we're like, okay, we gotta call a timeout because my tongue is destroyed right now. I can't taste anything anymore. So that's pretty impressive. Yeah. Well, one of our biggest things is we always add water afterwards, just because you don't have to. You have an option, especially if it's cask strength. But we tell our viewers it does give you a twofer sometimes because it changes the taste and smell completely.
Sure. Yeah.
So a different type of question for this bottle, though. Working with 6 distilleries and visiting, I don't know how many others over the last couple of years for you guys, do you find that the industry in America is collaborative and works well together, or are they competitive? Because I know in Scotland, believe it or not, they talk amongst each other a lot. They help each other a lot. If there's a problem in one distillery, that headmaster might call a distillery master down the road.
Yeah.
Hey man, I'm getting some funk out of this. I don't know what the problem, and they really do work with each other. And it sounds like these 6, which are big distilleries, these are big names, worked with you guys. And so was it smooth?
Yeah, I think that the industry is very collaborative, and honestly, if it wasn't, we wouldn't exist. Especially when there is no tradition of independent bottling in the U.S. Everything we're doing only exists because American distilleries want what we're doing to be a thing. So we exist in part because of them, because they're willing to sell us whiskey, because they're willing to let us put their names on the bottle and share their stories. And a lot of the single malt places were actually really excited when we reached out to them because they know of the Scottish tradition of independent bottlers. A lot of them are collectors of SMWS or Signatory or other independent bottlers. And they were like, oh, this is great. You're doing that. We've been wondering when someone would do that. Come on by, let's do it.
And I think with the American Vat and Malt blending session, it was actually really fun because a lot of the distillers hadn't tasted each other's whiskey. They may have talked to each other, but because things are so regional, a lot of these distilleries could not get their hands on whiskey from the other places. So we did it relatively blind on purpose. So some people didn't know, they knew their own whiskey and maybe one other, but having that experience of playing with other people's whiskey without necessarily having tasted the underlying product before was really fun. But I do think people are really collaborative with us, but also there is such a spirit of camaraderie across the industry. And it's been fun because we've been able to introduce some people to each other who we think will get along really well, but they're from across the country from each other. And that's been one of the really great parts.
You guys are kind of the scientists then of the industry right now, helping each other, hey, have you tried so-and-so over here? They do good stuff, and like, I haven't yet. And guess what? Perfect marriage.
That's it.
Right. So I put a wee bit of water on this just to see what would happen. And I got to tell you, it got really creamy and made the finish longer. It's delicious. It's really good. So this is still available.
Yes.
Yep. Everything we sent you still available because otherwise that's just mean.
That's true.
I like your attitude. Yeah.
Right.
I actually enjoy it with water. It's a lot more woody too coming out in the finish. Really
We'll
nice.
get some water too because we've got some droppers in our tasting room. It'll be
Good.
But while we're going to finish and enjoy the rest of this vatted glass, let's talk more about Lost Lantern. And I mean, I got to ask the question, where'd the name come from?
Yep.
So we love alliteration. You'll notice that a lot of our whiskey names are alliterative, like Gentle Giant, which we'll taste next.
Yeah.
But the idea behind Lost Lantern is the fact that we're finding whiskey that would otherwise be lost. So we thought that,
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I love it.
Okay, cool.
and our
Shine a light.
tagline is shining a light on the independent spirit, which is on every
Yep,
one
love
of the
it.
bottles.
Yep.
Awesome.
Very good.
Great story.
So philosophy of Lost Lantern. Let's switch gears into what what your philosophy is and how you do it, why you do it, what you're trying to do, I guess.
Yeah, so before the business model, what was the heart? And then how did you come up with a business model after that?
And I think the vision was just that we wanted to shine a light on the great whiskey that was coming from all across the country. Whiskey that reflected in some way where it was made, that was doing something unique and interesting and different. And that's what ultimately led into our road trip, because we lived in New York City at the time. We had access to a good amount of whiskey, but we also knew there was a lot of other stuff that we weren't getting. And as you know very well, like, you can understand a lot about a whiskey, but as soon as you actually go and visit where it's made, that teaches you so much more, both the distillery itself and even just the environs of it. So we decided pretty early on, we're going to take a road trip, spend 8 months on the road visiting distilleries all across the country, and decided early on that we will only ever work with distilleries that we visited in person. So that's true of all the components in the American Battle Malt, true of everything else that we've ever released. We've been to every one of those distilleries, talked to the distillers, often the owners or the founders, and pitched our vision of showcasing the great breadth of American whiskey to them.
Thank God for writing off expenses.
I was just gonna say, that's a lot of
Jesus,
miles,
Pete, man,
Clark.
right? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, man.
Yeah. But we think of ourselves as curators and part blenders. So the curation side has always been finding great whiskey and bringing it forward to people who wouldn't know that it existed otherwise. And then blending is bringing together these trends that we're seeing. So talking about regionality, we're actually coming out with our first regional collection at the end of this month.
Wow.
There isn't any single malt in it. It's
That's fine.
bourbon and rye. It's from the Midwest, but starting
And whiskey.
and wheat whiskey. That's true. There's some wheat whiskey in there,
okay.
but the blends like the American Battle Malt and also Flame and Shadow are giving a Lost Lantern perspective on different trends we're starting to see in the market. So it all comes from a place where we really wanted to learn more about American whiskey, and we couldn't do it without a brand like this. And so we decided to be that company for everyone else.
Yeah, I think you'd be crazy not to tap into the bourbon market and things like that, because
Oh, yeah.
that
Have to.
it's the largest component of American whiskey right now. So why would you not feed that market as an independent bottler? Because nobody is used to seeing independent bottlers of bourbons and things.
Well, and it's also a nice, way to segue people that might be into something that don't know into,
Fair.
other areas of the business.
I mean, we're kind of trying to do that right now with Scotch for Dummies and introduce people in America to American single malts, because, if you like Scotch, we want some of this, and it's up and coming. It's on we think it's on the rise.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, I wanted to, there was a question we had in regards to transparency and sustainability of Lost Lantern, and how do you guys view that? What's your views on transparency, and how sustainable is your model, I guess, is the question.
In terms of having access to whiskey where we can say where it came from.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's actually, we thought that it was going to be a challenging aspect of it, that we would have a hard time getting people to trust us with their brand name, and actually has ended up going pretty smoothly. I think it helps that we both came from the industry. A lot of the distillers we were talking to early on actually knew us already from our prior careers.
Oh, that's
So
good.
they were like, these aren't just a couple of like rich people coming in to buy up some barrels. It's like some people who actually like really love whiskey and have been involved with it for a long time. And that helped us get our foot in the door. And now people see that we're introducing whiskey from some of these distilleries to people who've never heard of it before. Not always, like Balcones is a well-known name, but there are other places that we work with that just don't have much reach, and we are small, but we punch above our weight class in terms of getting the stories that we're telling out and help people discover things.
Now, having their name on our label is part of why they want to work with us,
Yeah.
because our job is essentially to talk about why we think that they're great. And so using their
Yeah.
name helps.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
we have continuously been surprised by how easy it has been to convince people to use their name, both for single cask, but also our blends, because we're putting their whiskey with another distillery and they don't have control over that.
Right.
We always ask them if they want to taste it before we do it. We want to have them happy
Okay.
and continue wanting to work with us, but people ask for those samples less and less because they know us, they trust us. We have done justice to their whiskey in the past.
Right.
And so it's a real relationship of trust at this point.
Have you ever had anybody say, after tasting your blend, say, no, we don't want to be part of that?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Good. That's a good sign.
It's actually kind of
Drink
nice
that.
every once in a while when someone asks to taste it, because otherwise, like, it's just like the two of us and a few other people on our team tasting things, and then getting the outside validation that like someone tastes it and is like, yeah, we absolutely want our name on that. Actually feels
Right.
good. And
Yeah.
we're like,
Well,
all right.
Now that you're where you are, though, are you having distilleries reach out to you and
Yes.
say, "Hey, we'd really like you guys to
It's
come check us out"? And that's once you've gotten to that stage, you
Yeah.
guys get to kind of shift gears and get into overdrive, right?
And that started to happen over the last year or so, and it has been really interesting. We thought it would get there eventually, but it happened faster than we thought it would, which is we're thrilled by that.
That's
We're
great.
thrilled by
Good
the
for you.
reception, because we didn't know whether people would be ready for an American independent bottler, if
rinse.
he would even know what to make of it. But some like Scotch people get the idea right away, and then a lot of the people that who buy our whiskey don't know anything about Scotch. They don't know
Sure.
independent bottlers. They just like the idea. They're like, oh, I get it. This is something sourced from such and such a place, and they're telling us exactly where it's from. That's cool. You don't need the whole historical context to get excited by it.
Are you guys ready for the next bottle?
Distribution.
Let's do it.
So next up is Gentle Giant. This is from it's the only one tonight that we have from our single distillery series, which means it's a small blend of multiple barrels from one distillery.
Right. Same rules, though, right? Since it's in a single distillery, we can call it a single malt.
This is the only single malt, technically. Everything else is blended malts. So this is our single malt of the group.
Getting
Have
big,
you
buddy.
all had single malt from Balcones before?
Yes.
Of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah,
Yeah,
oh
we've
yeah.
had the Maltzilla and a few
Yeah.
other.
We got a few back here.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Balcones is great. We love that. We love their malts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Holding
So
out
do
to see
we.
what happens.
Yeah.
Now that they're owned by
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Empire, right? The Galactic Empire.
The Empire.
Yeah.
Star Wars segue.
Right.
Now.
No, sir, they do make great whiskey. They know what they're doing.
Yep.
But for us, we love their single malt, but it's also big and in your face.
Yes,
And
it
usually
is.
like can get close to being what we call face melters, which we drink and we love, but they're big.
Yes.
So when we talked about the side of Balcones that we wanted to show through this release, we said, what if we make a delicate, elegant single malt with their stock? And so for some of these releases, we go down to the distillery and in person do the blend there. So we actually rolled in and they had 100 barrel samples ready for us. And they said,
Oh, jeez.
have fun. We're here when you need us. Good luck.
Is there a cot in the back or
We
something
got-
so I can take a
We
nap?
got an Uber for you.
Right. Saline drip. for
I
Christ's
mean-
sake.
I mean, we started by eliminating roughly half of them just by nose alone because
Oh, okay.
because they were big and they were oaky and we knew we wanted to explore what a delicate Balcones whiskey is like. And that's why it's called Gentle Giant, is to speak to that profile.
Okay.
But we spent 2 days there blending from those 100 samples and we got it down to 4.5 casks for this.
But wait a
one.
minute. Gentle Giant. You're like delicate Balcones coming in at 57.6% ABV, right?
Well, for Balcones, that's fairly low.
It's
Yeah.
It's
That's
a
true.
relative thing. It's
Right.
it's
Relative.
all
yes, true.
relative.
Oh my God.
It's still a
Balcony.
giant. Giants are big. And it's
Good
just
point,
a
good
gentle
point.
giant.
Yeah.
Did you tell them you were looking at a delicate when you went down there, or did they just say, "Oh, you did"? Okay.
Do you
Well,
have an
we-
age on this?
Yes. There is
Three-year
an age.
age statement. Components are 3 to 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in
Um,
paperwork here.
Is it?
um, we had been wondering, we had done a couple of these before where people sent us some of the samples to our lab in advance so we could do a little bit of advanced screening. And I wondered why Balcones wasn't doing that. I had emailed their production person who's setting it up for us. So can you send us some of the samples ahead of time? And he just kept not doing it. And then when we got there, we understood it's because there were
100 samples.
Yeah, which ones?
Yeah.
Man, this is an explosion of an orchard in your mouth.
Yeah, there's all sorts of apple in there and sweetness and light.
Pears, peaches, red apples,
I'm trying to see,
Granny Smith.
trying to find the Balcones spirit in there.
I get
And-
Balcones, but I mean, apple too, but there's another fruit that I get.
Yeah, it's maybe even just
Peaches.
Peaches.
yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Yep.
That's pretty close.
Yeah, it's very very approachable too for what you're getting. I mean, it's nice and it's elegant. It's like I said, it's very orchardy. So you're getting some of that light wood influence as well. It's a nice
There it is.
rounded front to back as well. The finish is a little short. But that's
But
the first
in
step.
a light whiskey, you will typically have that.
Yep.
But yeah, now I'm being able to pull the Balcones distillate from the nose. Yeah. Kind of hearty.
You know, one
me,
thing we
it's-
didn't mention on the VAT was that it is that the price point of that it's
Oh, yeah.
retailing for was 120, I think, right?
Mhm.
And
Yep.
then the price point on this Gentle Giant's 100, just to put it out there.
Yeah.
So-
And to me, the mouthfeel on this is all Balcones. It's lighter than a lot of what goes out that they put into general distribution, but in some ways it was partly inspired by a special release they do called Balcones Mirador, which is also pretty used oak forward and is relatively limited availability. I think it does get outside of Texas, but not in huge quantities.
I think we've
So
had
this is a
miracles.
side of them that does exist, that they do show off to people, but it's one that is not always the first side of Balcones that people see.
And it's worth noting that, so all of that apple and peach that you're getting, 2 of the 4.5 casks that the whiskey spent its time in were ex-apple brandy casks. So
Well, that might
There
explain
you
it.
go.
Yeah, you can.
What do you
definitely
know?
Get it. It's in there. But I
Yeah.
mean, I appreciate what you sent us as far as, you know, the sheet on the bottles, because I really, your tasting notes and your nose notes they're pretty spot on. And I'm not saying I'm good, I'm saying you are, because I get everything that you got out of there.
So do you guys
they
both
did work.
collab on that whole piece as far as how you fill out the tasting notes and stuff, or how does that
Right up.
process working?
it's like 70% him, 30% me. If there's a baked good in the tasting note, it probably comes from me. If it's not a cake or a cookie or something like that, it probably came from him.
You and I are a lot alike.
Yeah, he
'cause
does lots of
I do a lot of
Pop-Tarts.
yes, I do a lot of candy and other things from my childhood. It's like, okay, these things remind me of this, you know, so it's
That's
funny.
funny.
Exactly.
Do you want to ask about distribution? Is that what you wanted to ask about?
Yeah, so part of the problem I have with American single malts and other, well, I guess independents, is it's hard to find around here. And it's hard, and trying to get, Cedar Ridge or trying to, westward you can get, Balcones you can kind of get around here, Virginia, maybe. But finding all these great independent or all these distilleries, you just can't get. How do you kind of break through
That's a
that
good question.
regional distribution to become a national brand?
So part of how we started was through e-commerce. So we work with a couple of retail partners that are able to ship to 40 states. And that's
Okay.
allowed us to translate the national media coverage that we've been getting to people actually getting their hands on it without
exactly.
having to
Right.
ship all over the country. Because something like this is 1,000 bottles. That's not enough to do a national push. So
Yeah.
doing the e-commerce style in the early stages has been really, really important to us because we've been lucky enough to get so much great coverage that it's important that people read about us and then there's a way for them to get access to the bottles.
yeah.
We're starting to go into more traditional style distribution in California, New York, and maybe Massachusetts later this year, but we're starting to build
Okay.
out that playbook and we'll grow with the volume that we're able to put out and keep the quality level where we want it to be over time.
Yeah. So the best way to get our whiskey, unless you're in New York or California,
Yeah.
is just to go to our website, loslanternwhiskey.com, plug in your state, and then it'll direct you to a retailer that can ship to you.
Ship it to you.
Yeah, I was playing with that
Yeah,
website
so-
earlier.
But can we agree that 3-tier system sucks?
It's
or-
so stupid.
I mean,
really
2024.
difficult.
You guys may not be officially say that. We can keep up the record.
we
but
can.
It's so dumb.
It's every state is effectively a different country, which
Yes.
is
Ridiculous.
really hard.
Oh. Yeah, that's I don't even, it gets me upset. We've been trying to get a bottle of cask of Scotch for years now, and you know, when you got to add an importer into that mix, it
Now you have a
even worse.
4-tier system.
So it's
You
horrible.
got 6-tier then.
So how do you get into all 50 states then if you're only in 40 now? You have to get another distributor or another e-commerce place?
We probably won't get into all states. I mean, ironically, so we're in Vermont, and one of the 40 states that one of the 10 states that we cannot ship to is Vermont. So we now have a
Oh,
tasting
wow.
room here,
So
and
people
people
can
can
come
buy
and
in
get it.
person,
Yeah.
but that's it. So I mean, for us, we will probably not be in every state for a long, long time because we are focusing on places where people are buying the
Oh, fair point.
types of whiskey that we're putting out at the price points that we're putting it out.
Yep.
So there are a lot of places in the United States where we can sell our whiskey, but all 50 states, we'll probably go international before we go to all 50 states in the
Oh,
US.
wow. Okay.
Okay. So one of the things I think is interesting too about your bottles, you know, talking about, you know, your marketing here, but who does the labeling? Because you have a very consistent marketing and it's well done. Your
Thank you.
artistry, do you have
Yeah.
someone on staff that makes the designs or just curious?
No, it's not me. We work with a label design firm who has built the structure of them, and then we just redo for each release. So it's actually, they basically created a template for me. So yes, I spend some time in Illustrator, but I am not a designer by background or skill set. So
Awesome. You did a good job. You've done very well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Label together and do the design bits. And it's yeah, we're a small team still, so we're a relatively young company and growing quickly, but still definitely doing a lot of things ourselves, which
it's
is nice.
5 of us.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah.
So that I was
Okay.
going to ask that question because I'll do a segue of the video I saw on Instagram of I think that your bottling machine or something you
Yeah.
posted a while back. And so you do the bottling and the labeling, everything in-house there?
As of this past winter. So for a while we were working with distilleries in Vermont to do it for us, but the more that we've been blending, the more we realized that we needed full control over it. So we can take as long as we want to without driving a distiller crazy. Besides driving our team crazy, we can do that, but not necessarily an outside distiller. So now it's all done in-house, and that's going to be really important for us as we grow.
Yeah.
That we can be nimble with our production and dial those blends in as we need to.
It's a great learning curve for you too, as getting into this business to figure out, you know, trials and tribulations of how things work and what you need to buy, et cetera. So that's a really good model.
So when you create a blend or a vat of whiskeys, do you have to bottle it immediately? So you make one vat and you bottle it all, then you just distribute as you can, or do you store like small vats of that blend for a subsequent bottling?
It's all one.
It's all one. Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's on that. Yeah.
So talking about the labels is a good segue into the question that I had though, and talking about the Lost Lantern whiskey collection and the flavor profiles, because I know that the labels are different colors for a reason. And you have three main, I don't want to say main categories, you have three categories that your offerings are bundled into,
Yeah.
right? So let's talk about those categories and then the labeling thereof inside of those categories, because I think it's kind of important for people to understand when they're looking at your bottle.
Yeah. So we have 3 basic styles of whiskey that we put out, and you've tasted 2 of them already. There's the blend series, which is whiskeys from multiple distilleries that are blended together. Pretty straightforward. There's the single distillery series, like the Gentle Giant, which is multiple barrels from one distillery. And then there's our single cask series, which is one cask from one distillery. And there are some like visual continuity and some differences between them. And then there's also a color scheme within the single cask and the single distillery series where almost all single malts go in brown, bourbon is in red, rye is in green, Other whiskeys are in a cream color, and that's also used for more unusual flavors. Like some single malts that don't really taste like single malt go in the cream label. And then blue is for the blend series, the multi-distillery blends.
Yeah, it's good to understand, you know, what your thought process is. And so when I see something on a shelf, if I happen to, I know what I'm looking for and I understand that. It made me think of your single cask series, having, being an IB fan myself, right? SMWS type stuff. Loved single casks, right? Everybody loves a single cask whiskey, right? The bad thing is you fall in love with it and she's, you'll never see that lover again, right? But then the beauty is there's another one around the corner, hopefully. But it's one of those love-hate relationships when it comes to single casks.
Yeah. And so the single distillery series actually came out of that exact thing where we had a release from Balcones that actually sold out in an hour. And it was the first time that we got very salty emails about it. And we'd already been thinking about doing mini blends from a distillery, but that became clear that we needed something. We can still do single casks, but also having something that sticks around for 3 to 6 months. So if people hear about it here, they can still buy it rather than it being gone. If you're in a meeting at work and you don't buy it immediately, it's already gone. So,
or it goes into a lottery system and you're like, really? That sucks.
Yep. I hear you.
For the consumer.
The hard thing is it's very hard for us to predict. Like we usually put out our whiskeys in collections once a quarter with 1 or 2 large releases and 5 or 6 single casks. And we can usually guess that 1 or 2 of the single casks will probably sell out on launch day, but we don't always know which ones. And like we have our guess, but sometimes we're totally wrong. So it's not like we can totally plan for it. Like we don't want to, it's awkward to do a lottery when there's plenty for everyone. There's no point in that. And then if you don't do a lottery for something that ends up being a surprise hit, then everyone gets mad at you.
Yeah.
Right.
What are you going to do? Yeah.
So we've got one more section of questions or categories before we move on to the next whiskey. I got enough to get through it, even though that was a big pour. Trying to kill me?
Trying.
57.6 and Drew decides to go with 3-finger pour. Yeah, all right. Okay. Collaboration with craft distilleries. So this question is not on here, but before we get into those questions, we say craft distilleries. It makes me think of 10, 15 years ago in the craft beer market, right? I mean, remember all of a sudden these craft breweries are just popping up all over the country, right? And it was just on every street corner, I had a new brew, and they're all these crazy crafty names and everything. And to be fair, a vast majority of them like, I can't even drink that. I mean, some of them, there were some good ones that came out and they're still around today, and that's great. But when you say the word craft, I get turned off a little bit because I'm just like, the chances of that being good are probably something just because of my experience in the craft beer industry. But you guys are doing it with distilleries now, and you talked about it earlier with 2,600 distilleries out there. I mean, everybody's getting creative and trying new and wild and crazy things. So there's going to be some bads, but there's also going to be some new discoveries. So let's talk about that with your experience with Lost Lantern.
Yeah, I mean, that exact experience is one of the reasons that we think Lost Lantern is needed, because they're 2,600 distilleries. There are going to be some ones that you do not want to drink, and there will be some that you look at the packaging and you're like, well, that's not going to be good, but it's beautiful whiskey. Right. And so our job is to do the sifting for you, because we taste a lot of things, although you do pretty good. You've gotten really good at screening things out now. So you're tasting fewer and fewer bad things, but
really? So what's that process like? Because that's the magic there. And I know you've tasted, there's 2,600 distilleries. You've tasted hundreds of them. You've only bottled the what? 2 dozen? So it tells me something.
Yeah. He was just saying, so more and more I stay back and run the business and the production and all of that. And he's out traveling without me. And he was just telling me that he tastes a lot of bad whiskey. It just doesn't make it to me.
It doesn't make it bad. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You could argue the same thing with some scotches from Islay. I mean, there's a lot of people out there take a good whiff of a Lafroig and be like, who drinks that?
How many times have you had that conversation with somebody? I'm like, that's an ashtray and fire pit, blah, blah, blah. It's like delicious.
I have an answer to that now. Try this Malort.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
You know, once you've had that, everything else
Everything's-
is good.
That's
Okay.
A couple
I
glasses.
love it. Yeah.
It's a good segue into the smoked stuff.
Hmm.
Good.
Hey, good
segue.
segue. Hey, before we do that, one of the things you mentioned about wine sample, I know it's on your website too. So to be fair, I think you guys, when you get you make your picks, it's blind mostly. Like you try to get your samples and figure out which one you want, and you decide unanimously to say that's the one.
Yeah. So we know what distillery it comes from, but we mix the samples around as much as we can and we taste them in different orders because we're looking for consistency. We're looking for consistency in what we like and consistency in the samples through different days, and what we eat changes our palates. And
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
for better or for worse, we both have to say yes to every single cask we buy, and our palates are quite different. So sometimes it is a long selection process. We've tasted flights up to 12 or 13 times at the most.
Wow. I mean, we've been going through samples from distilleries too, and we kind of follow the same process. It's not just about sampling it once. It's sampling it multiple times, different orders, different times of the day, different foods beforehand or after, different moods, all of that changes. I guess my question is, when you guys do stuff like these blends, you blend it, you taste, and you're like, oh, it's great. How long do you let it sit before you come back and taste it again to see if it really did gel or it got, as you said, spiky or whatever?
We give it a couple of days. So we do blends iteratively. We'll make some number of initial blends, we'll taste them, and then we'll tweak it. We make them and then they sit for a couple of days, and then we taste them and decide what directions we want to pursue. And then we'll continue doing additional iterations, maybe 5 or 6 different versions until it's done. But we always let it marry for at least a couple of days. Ideally, like tomorrow we're working on a blend, we'll do our tabletop prototype blends on Friday, and then we'll come back on Monday and see how they've integrated. Because if you taste it that day, you will taste the last thing you added to the whiskey.
Oh, interesting.
I've never paid attention to that, but yeah, you will not get the final product taste. I guarantee you that.
So that's interesting. You said that about kind of that subliminal thing. One of the things too that, we 4 of us, and we've been doing this for a while, but we know each other pretty well now, I would say. But it is kind of funny how, when you all do your tasting, et cetera, if someone says something, you're like, yeah, that sounds about right. I'm getting that too. Do you guys find yourself doing that as well?
Yeah. So we're very strict that we can't talk during the tasting until and decided, which sometimes someone breaks that rule.
Why would you do that, Adam?
When I really don't like something, I can't control my face. I don't say anything ever. There's just sometimes where I grimace and
Right.
yeah.
Lemon meringue, what?
Yeah, you'll just grimace and subtly say, well, that one sucks. And then,
Right.
well, I'm not done over here yet.
Maybe I
Yeah.
like this one.
Yeah. We taste
That's
in
awesome.
full silence, not like literally no music, no nothing. Keep it just all about our senses this way. And then once we're all done tasting through whatever it is, we'll talk.
That's how I was trained at Whiskey Advocate. I don't know if that's how you were trained at Astor too, because as soon as somebody says anything, it
It's over.
breaks your concentration and it heavily influences what you think.
I've been telling him that for 8 years now. He keeps talking. I don't know why.
I talk in my sleep. I can help. But on the flip side of that, let's talk about that. It does help sometimes when you're stuck on
Stubborn.
you've got something in there. You're
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, what is it? What is it? What is it? And somebody says something, and it might not be what you're getting, but it gets you to where you were going or whatever. You come up with
Transition.
that flavor, right?
Yeah.
But we've got 2 glasses
Yeah,
apiece here. What are we doing?
Let's do the next round.
Okay. Sure.
Okay, the next round.
I think they wanted to both these at the same time.
Flame and Shadow. Yes.
Yeah.
So these were made to be a pair.
Really, really? Oh, wow.
Oh, so you should buy these in a duo. All right. Well, let's let
Yeah,
everybody know what
let's
they're.
do it.
Let's let everybody know what they're getting into. If you got to buy a 2-pack here, kids, Flame is $100 and Shadow is $100.
Left is shadow.
So you can get
Left
a 2
is
for
Shadow.
200. Adam.
Yeah, so Flame and Shadow are both blends of smoked American single malts, but they're actually quite different types of smoke. So Flame is a blend of mesquite smoked single malt from 2 different distilleries. And mesquite smoked single malt is a tradition that's arisen relatively recently in the Southwest, which is made much like Scottish peated whiskeys, except instead of using peat to smoke the barley, they use mesquite wood, which is native to the Southwest and adds a like a bright, warm, citrusy, and yeah, maybe a little barbecue-y flavor to it. And then that's Flame, and then Shadow is a blend of peated American single malts. So that's the much more traditional Scottish style peat, and in fact, all the barley that went into that was smoked with Scottish peat, although they were all American single malts and distilled and aged here.
Thanks
So
for answering the question.
I was going to ask the question too.
I mean, that was our first question. Where did peat come from, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, one of the
So
components.
first,
Yeah, Flame first and then Shadow. One of the components of Shadow actually has Isla peat. McCarthy is the only American distillery that we know of that gets peat and malt with the peat coming from Isla.
Yep.
Interesting.
So we need to try Flame first or
Flame
Shadow?
Flame
Flame
first.
first.
Right?
Flame
Okay.
first.
Right side.
Go right side.
Go right side is what I heard.
So to get more specific, it is a blend of single malt from Santa Fe Spirits, which is in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Whiskey Del Bach, which is in Tucson, Arizona. Both places that are not traditionally associated with whiskey, but we think are making some really, really cool stuff.
And we know
We
you've
had-
had some whiskey Del Bach because that
That's
was
Del
the
Bach.
I was
Mexican
Del
gonna say,
Bach.
Del Bach we like.
That was
Yeah, we had that in 2 times in 2 different applications, and we're like,
Oh, nice.
wow.
It's delicious.
yeah,
All right.
very good.
So I will say the nose is very light. There is nice, a little bit of smoke on the nose.
It's sweet. Yeah, it's a sweet smoke though. Yeah, barbecue it's not right as far as barbecue for me on this. It's more aromatic, more resiny.
So this is the mesquite smoked one.
Yeah, it doesn't have as much like sweetness. Well, I mean, there's some sweetness.
Just lightly smoked. I
Yeah,
would
lightly
say.
smoked. Yep.
All right.
Now,
Well, and the question for me
What
comes
barreling?
because in the Scotch world, you'll see the word smoke and you'll see the word peat, and they're sometimes they're interchangeable, but I don't think they are. I think there's a very distinct difference between the two. But a lot of people just use those 2 words synonymously. You know, oh, it's really smoky. You're like, no, that's peat, but this one's smoky. You know, so I was very curious to know why these were singled out. But to me, the big difference is this is mesquite.
Yes.
And so, I mean, it has nothing to do with peat. That's what makes it really
Yes.
unique.
Yes. And it's wonderful. It's really good.
it starts out real sweet, vanilla, kind of creaminess, and then the smoke blows up in the mid to late palate.
Yeah, it kind of explodes in your mouth a little bit with flavor profiles. I mean, coffee, creme brulee to a little bit of that smoky finish, a little mesquite, like you were talking about with it. Almost like you're smoking something in a smoker and you get a little hint of it in the background.
So I grew up partly in Missouri, and barbecue in Missouri is a lot of sweeter, like almost ketchup barbecue sauce.
Yeah.
This is not that. This is more of that dry rub. This is not super sweet.
Yeah, there's a slight bit of a spiciness in there.
Yeah. And what was the ABV on this again?
I'm looking
113.8.
113.9.
Nine.
That's all proof. Wow, the math is hard. You know what I mean? I'm so used to ABV because my head's over in Scotland, right?
Yeah,
That's
we-
actually a good question. You guys don't say ABV, do you? We use proof.
No, we say proof.
So
Yeah.
another question out of curiosity, it just popped in. Are you guys going to start changing your bottle sizes?
Oh, that's a good question.
Oh,
We would love to do 700 milliliter bottles. I have not been able to find them in our bottle shape yet. So
oh, really?
in the US, I think they make them for other countries, but I have not gotten a good line on those in the United States. So it'd be nice to be in 700 mLs because then we can just do whatever we want to do. But for now, we are sticking to what we have until I can
This is
find
a
that.
fairly standard bottle that you can get
Right.
lots of places.
Yeah,
Yep.
you mentioned SMWS as an IB from across the pond, and once that change came, anybody here in the States that's an SMWS member is getting 700s now, you know?
Mhm.
And it's,
Which makes sense. They only have to
It makes-
bottle once. Yeah.
I know, but it doesn't
It's
make
the
sense.
same
for
price though, right?
Right, it's the same price for the consumer. It's like, you know, they did it with potato chips a long time ago and 2 liters. And
Shrinkflation.
one, you know, it's like, son of a gun, you know, it's happening in my
Ice
whiskey
cream.
world.
The half gallon of ice cream is now 1.5
See,
quarts. Yeah.
you've been scorned, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is what we deal with right here.
This is really interesting. How many bottles were this? 400 bottles.
That's such a
And
good
you still
balance
have
of.
this?
We still have a little bit. Yeah.
I was gonna
So
say
for-
like, what, 3 bottles or?
These came out this winter.
Yeah,
So in
it's
November.
our newest
Yeah.
release.
Oh, wow. So it's not old either.
No. And honestly, like it's not like Scotland. There's no tradition of smoked single malts in the US, let alone blends of smoked single malts. Like we think these are the first ever blends of smoked American single malts like this. So like we created these not for a market demand, but because we wanted to, and we thought that the parts would go really well together and make a delicious whiskey. And we wanted to,
And it's part of the story we're telling.
we wanted to
Yeah.
create blends that push the story of American smoke forward. So
And it's like the flame, the mesquite is the new tradition of smoke coming out of the US. And then shadow, which is peated single malt, that's the American interpretation of a historic tradition of peated
Right.
single malt.
Interesting. Okay.
So these are designed to be a comparison point and to be able to explore what's happening in the US when it comes to smoked whiskey.
Well, they are definitely
Yeah.
completely different than
So
us.
when I go into the shadow, you definitely get a mustiness, almost a Campbelltown funk in there a little
There's
bit.
a little- we call
I
it
said
funk.
that, I said
Yeah.
that earlier before we started. I did a sample of this one. I'm like, this is funky.
So, okay, so side note, I guess. So we you can say regions or not, but I mean, there are certain things where we qualify when we taste things like you said, Campbelltown funk, things like that. Do you guys think that some way sometimes when you look at some whiskeys, maybe obviously not everything Scotland, but also America, like some certain areas and say that's all Texas, that's all Virginia or whatever. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, totally.
Absolutely. Oh,
Oh, that's
Texas
good.
is maybe most obvious because it's such a hot and mostly pretty
Yeah.
dry climate that it really shows pretty quickly.
yeah. And they can cheat too, because they can age so much faster down there. It's not fair.
Honestly, the mesquite to me should be its own category. It should be a new category of American
Well, it is.
malts. To me, it's like if you're a whiskey nerd,
The Southwest smoke.
you got to try it. If you're a whiskey nerd and you don't buy a bottle of this, you're not a whiskey nerd because you've got to look at the bottle and be like, what the what? You know,
different.
I got to get one of those home
Yeah.
and see what's up because
It's so beautifully put
it's
together.
really-
and it's just-
it's very, very interesting.
And it's fun tasting it with some Scotch guys because it's a kind of smoke you would never see in Scotland because it wouldn't make any sense. But it's still, we think, appeals to people who love Scotch, which we do as well, of course.
Which is why I would want to take some of this over to Scotland. And
Oh, go to Islay.
as you're, you're
Give it to the guys at Lagavulin.
exactly,
Say,
you're,
hey, what do you think of this?
stopping into the distilleries and you get a little smell. I'm like, check this smoke stuff out.
Sounds like America.
Right.
So this second one, this is the shadow. It's night and day, but definitely more of some of the familiar peaty things that I have had in Scotland, I would say. Not toe to toe, but it's almost kind of like a combination of different regions in Scotland, like Campbelltown meets Highland peat meets a little bit of lowland or something, going on. I don't know. It's just a little different.
Yeah, it's got kind of the peat nature of a young peated whiskey in Scotland that may not have been like coastal age or something. It doesn't have the saltiness and brininess of like a coastal aging, but it's got definitely the notes of the bright young peat that is intense. I generally like more age on my peated whiskeys, but this is well balanced with sweetness to.
I was
So,
gonna
so
say,
it's not like you said, it's not all spiky. Yeah, exactly.
it's got a nice sweetness. I mean, honestly, it's a great door opener for someone that has not really had much experience with peat. It kind of gets them into
Yeah.
a little bit of the world of saying, hey, see if you like this versus the normal thing when you get of like, oh, I've had Lafroig. I'm like, no, hold on, hold your brakes.
So I-
At the end of the day, I think you guys did a good job on both of these. I think you can probably see that we're preferring, and we're actually really into the mesquite stuff because obviously it was the ones we've had so far. Both have done well, but I'm curious. So, out of the bottles that you've done, and which one is doing better than the other, or do you have favorites?
Dun, dun, dun. The big question.
Well, first, before I answer that, I want to say that the Shadow, you're very astute to say it doesn't have that maritime influence, because the component parts of it are from Boulder Spirits in Colorado, Cedar Ridge in Iowa, and McCarthy's Hood River, Oregon. None of which are Colorado and Iowa are very, very far from the coast. McCarthy's
little
is
bit.
at least like an hour or so from the coast.
Yeah.
And
there's some new oak on it as well. So 2 of the 3 components, or with distilleries rather, do new American oak. So that sweetness is also coming.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
That direction. The fun for us of these 2 is demand and reactions are roughly split evenly.
Do you know the different demographics of people that choose one over the other?
I mean, we find that mesquite generally is a great gateway to smoke for a lot of bourbon drinkers, because they will have had that Lafroig kind of like smack you in the face, make you hate it. But then it's a way for them to go, oh wait, smoke is beyond, it goes beyond something.
It can be good. It can be good.
And then our goal is to slowly bring them back all the way to peak. But we found, I think, the mesquite seems to be more popular with the American whiskey drinker focused on
Okay.
bourbon and rye.
I was gonna say the exact opposite of that. Which
Are you guys married?
is that I think the Shadow, because it has that new American oak influence, really appeals to bourbon drinkers, and because the mesquite is a little lighter, that often is like, I'm not that surprised that you, as a bunch of Scotch guys, gravitated towards that. But there is also what Nora said is true, is that there are people who, it turns out they think they don't like smoke, but they really just don't like peat.
Yeah.
And
I do
Yes,
think
it's
that
true.
the flame is also more innovative. No one has ever, that we know of, has ever made a blended malt like that. So
I
to
like
me, if you all are regularly drinking peated Scotch, Shadow is going to be less interesting, because it's both an American version of something you already love and is a flavor profile that
Sure.
you generally get, whereas the mesquite can be really new and interesting. So I'm also not surprised that you're gravitating towards that direction.
That's
For what it's-
That's fair. That's a fair point. I mean, obviously, read the room, right? Obviously, we have
Oh.
to some degree, but you've done a good job of both of them. I mean, I appreciate both of these glasses right now, both these bottles, what you've done. So they're good picks. And I think there's a calling for each side, whether you are a new drinker into, American singles or whatever, or into bourbon. So you have options.
So wait a minute. You said read the room. Let's figure it out. We're going round robin here.
Yep.
Who's who? Who's who?
Okay. Team Flame or Team Shadow?
I want you to guess what you think the 2 of us are, because we're different teams.
I'm gonna say, well, should we powwow or just?
No. You do your guess. I got my own.
I'm gonna say Nora is Team Shadow and Adam is Team Flame.
I'd go similar.
Yeah,
Man,
that's
I
right.
hate to freaking jump on that freaking wagon and say 3-fer, but that's what I wanted to do. But now I want to go the other way. Just to
No,
be
be honest.
all right. So
Are we
that's,
right or
that's
wrong?
a unanimous Scotch for Dummies.
Larry said it was right. Yeah,
Is that
That's
right?
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
So now let's go here.
I'm Team Flame.
Flame.
Your Team Flame. Here's the Scotch whore coming out in me. I am Team Flame without water, and I'm Team Shadow with water.
Of course, a flip flop.
Flip flop.
I'm just saying.
So
This is
the thing I like about the flame is it's the Del Bach that we had
Yeah.
before. That it's unique. It's innovative. It's a beautiful whiskey, and you don't get that whiskey anywhere else in the world. And that's the thing I love about it.
I think the other thing too, to be fair, is, and one of the things we are on too individually, is we as a group, I mean, we're looking for our next bottle, something we can do, and we're looking for something that has uniqueness to it, and that funky, what we love of funkiness is I feel like it's in that flame a little bit with that mesquite. It's doing something that I'm like, That's pretty cool. It's different. It's neat.
Yeah, and it's not over the top. It's not
No.
like too in your face. Like, oh, this is going to be a mesquite whiskey. No, it's not. It's like, hey, we're going to add some mesquite to this and make a good whiskey.
But you put a little water on Shadow and it just takes me back to
okay.
Scotland, baby.
All right, let's go.
I mean, I want to put my kilt on. No, they're really both good. And I really appreciate the fact that you're right. They should be compared. So anybody that's watching this video down the road, if you're going to buy one, buy the other, because you need to match them up and have some fun with it. Take it to your whiskey club and have some fun with it.
That's
what
a
you
great
should-
idea.
You should be doing. And if you don't want to do that, buy the mesquite one just because it's different and you're probably going to be pleasantly surprised.
Well, this has been an amazing interview with you guys, getting to know you guys.
Get the
So what?
2024 collection.
Oh yeah. talk
Oh,
about
well,
that.
yeah, well, let's dun. How about
Yeah.
this?
So 2024 collection, we saw, I don't know where you got the graphic.
It was on their Instagram.
Oh, on Instagram. So I happen to notice there is an Indiana distillery on that.
I
list.
did see that.
So talk to us about these, what are these 7 whiskeys that are coming out here in
March 27th.
a week?
So it's our first regional collection focusing on the Midwest. We have a blend of straight ryes that we made called Farflung Rye that are all Midwest ryes that really encapsulate what we think of as the flavor profile, the emerging flavor profile of Midwestern rye.
And then we have single casks we have a Starlight bourbon from Indiana. Nice. A Wisconsin bourbon from Wallersheim Distillery, an Illinois bourbon from Few Spirits, 2 Ohio ryes, one from Middle West and one from Tom's Foolery, which is a 9-year-old. It's the oldest whiskey we've ever
Oh,
released.
wow. That's cool.
And then a 6-year-old Cedar Ridge wheat whiskey.
Malted
wow.
wheat whiskey.
Malted wheat whiskey.
So
Oh, that sounds good. Yeah.
that's why that label is so different,
It's
right?
great, yeah.
Right.
It's going to be the sleeper hit of that group because nobody knows what to expect from a wheat whiskey, but once you try it, it's spectacular.
Well, and our last malted wheat whiskey is one that people are still emailing us about over a year later, asking us if we have any extra bottles. So kind of the younger sibling of it, it's at 6 years. That one was 8. So I think that people will be excited for that one because it is malted wheat. Where do you see that? Very few places.
This is cool. This is exciting that this is coming out in a couple of weeks, and I'm glad you pulled that graphic. But you were saying this was really a cool interview to get to know you guys and the whole story and the experience of the whiskeys, and you gave us 4 really cool whiskeys to try.
Yes, thank you.
Looking forward to seeing what you guys do in the future with this collection. Really want to push you guys to do some American single malts more because that's what we're going to start pushing on our front. We're kind of excited about the future of American single malts. And I mean, we're not giving up our Scotch roots. Love Scotch. I'm going to be a Scotch whore until the day I die. But at the end of the day, I think American single malts have a lot to do. And I'm really excited that you guys are playing in that field and giving them some kudos. And
Yep.
Yeah.
Good.
And if anyone is curious, we didn't taste any of the single cask tonight, but we have a number of American single casks that we've released relatively recently that are still available. We've had one from the Midwest. We had a Cedar Ridge, Iowa single malt, which is finished in a sherry cask, which is like the closest American version of a sherry bomb we've ever seen. A Westward single malt from Oregon, finished in a Chardonnay cask. A McCarthy's peated single malt.
Yeah.
Some Westland single casks from Washington. Some really fun stuff. In addition to the blends and Gentle Giant that we tasted today, and very, very unique and unusual single malt from St. George Spirits called Mountain Meadow, which is unlike anything that anyone has ever had before because it's distilled from fully hopped beer. So it's a totally
Oh, interesting.
God, I don't like hops. I'm interested to try the whiskey because I'm really not a hoppy beer guy. I want to know, does it translate into the whiskey?
You'll get a little bit of the pininess of hops, but the way that they distill it, it's more floral, which is why we call it Mountain Meadow, where it's quite delicate, but you do get some of the hop character, but it's not the skunky kind of dank side of hops that you can get in beer. It's more the floral delicate side.
Well, I've got one more question.
Go
You guys
ahead.
got any?
Oh, go
I
ahead.
do have a question. Go ahead.
You guys hire?
No,
That's your question.
well, that actually relates to my
I
question
mean,
because I know you did like 24 cask and 24 bottles last year. What is your exponential curve of what you're doing in 2024, 2025, et cetera? How are you expanding to meet the demand?
Well, it sounds like they're getting popular because people are calling
That's
you
what I'm saying.
that. That's
That's
great.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, so we're going to continue with single cask kind of where we are now, but the main volume driver are these blends that you're trying, and the single distillery series. We're able to start going into scores with those. Single cask will primarily still be online and a little bit in other places, but single casks become unwieldy and hard to talk about when they get too large, unless you have a club like Scotch Malt Whiskey Society, but that's not the model that we're currently looking at. So a lot of it is our perspective on distilleries through a single distillery series or blending multiple things together.
So how can our viewers get in touch with you and buy your product?
So the best place to go is lostlanternwhiskey.com. We have extensive product information there. And also that's the easiest place to put in your state. And then we'll tell you where you can pick up a bottle. We're also on all kinds of socials, Lost Lantern Whiskey, Instagram, Facebook, and a little bit on TikTok.
Oh, you're exploring.
Oh, no, they're gone.
For a little
I didn't
bit,
even know.
for a little bit. But we're very active there as well. So you can get in contact with us either through our website or Instagram primarily, and buy bottles that way as well.
And there's a contact form on our website with email that goes directly to us.
Yeah.
And we do read all of that. And if someone wants to just like nerd out about whiskey and ask us like for very specific recommendations based on what they like, we are more than happy to do that. And we actually enjoy that.
Or we could just road trip to Vermont.
I was just going to say, they can come to you.
Yes,
tasting
thank you.
Come to the tasting room.
Yeah, thank you for the reminder. So we also have our production space and tasting room in Vermont. And the fun there is we have bottles of almost all of our releases we've ever put out. So things that are long sold out elsewhere, we still have bottles here.
Yes, we
Like,
kept
you need to do a
sound
road trip,
friendly.
boys.
Road
You
trip.
guys need to get a webcam on the bottling process so we can always snipe in. Be like, wonder what they're doing in Vermont. Oh, they're bottling whiskey, you know?
Fun idea.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you so much for your time today. Really appreciate this. I can tell you just all the things you got coming up. I mean, I want to buy your product because you've proved it, you know what you're doing, and I'm excited for you, especially the wheat. You've got me really convinced to buy this wheat now.
Right.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. But kudos to you. Congratulations on your business model so far, and nothing but the best for you in the future.
Thank you.
Man,
so
I gotta
much.
say cheers. Double fisting, but I'm gonna go with this one. I'm gonna go with the shadow.
Cheers to you guys.
Cheers to
Thank
y'all.
you so much.
So much for having us.